have a director of the documentary film Beyond Utopia, Madeleine Gavin. Madeleine, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm good. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about this really incredible film. I saw it at its world premiere at the 2023 Sundance Film Festival, and I have not stopped raving about it ever since. I still maintain nearly 300 films in this year. This is my favorite documentary of the year.
Wow, that's that's I'm honored. That's amazing.
So I want to first start off by asking, because you're attempting to tell a story that has a tremendous amount of scope here. You have to educate the audience on the conditions that are taking place inside North Korea, an area that so many of us do not have visible access into to really fully understand. So, how do you start the research process first and foremost, and set the stage, if you will, before we start getting into following certain people throughout the documentary?
I started the research process for this by just going totally in, doing a deep dive in every direction. Um, you know, Probably the most meaningful was using VPNs and searching the internet high and low from every country, from every language, because I was discovering that depending on what country I searched from or what language I searched in, I was finding different little tidbits about North Korea, both the propaganda and what's been going on and what the people are being, fed and exposed to in that country. And also I began to find hidden camera footage that was being shot by very brave North Koreans who were really risking their lives, shooting in the sleeves of their jackets and in their pockets and paper bags to try to document what's really going on inside North Korea, because the regime does not allow that footage out. So
Right.
these are people who are risking their lives to smuggle out footage of what's really going on. And that opened my eyes to both the reality and to the fact that we really don't have the opportunity to hear from 26 million people who live inside that country. We really, in the outside world, have not heard their voices. And that's when I felt like this film has to be made.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, that in and of itself is extraordinary. I learned so much while watching this documentary that, it's like you hear vague things and, stuff that has meaning behind it that you don't necessarily know the details about. Okay, yes, we know that the people in North Korea are living under a tyrannical rule. What does that exactly look like? What does that exactly mean? And so your doc does a really great job of diving deep into that, setting the stage and letting us know what the conditions are like. Now we find out that there are people, specific people, who are attempting to flee North Korea, where they're risking the consequence of death in these cases. And so the documentary then becomes essentially a dramatic thriller of sorts. I have so many questions. I don't even know where to begin at this point, because I always respect filmmakers who are willing to put themselves on the line in any capacity to capture the truth, and this documentary does that. um I mean, where, like, once again, where does one even begin? Was it with, like, how did you establish contact with who was like your resource, your in, as it were, to figure out how you were going to covertly tell this story?
Yeah, my initial in was Hyunseo Lee, who's a very high profile defector. She had written a memoir called The Girl with Seven Names. And so she was really the first person who I came to know. And I knew that Hyunseo would be part of the film, but I knew as I had done this research that I wanted to do something that was experiential, that really forced people outside of North Korea to come face to face with North Koreans, because I was so outraged by the fact that we don't have an opportunity to come face to face with them or to hear from them. And that part of the story really came through my relationship with Pastor Kim. Pastor Kim is a pastor in South Korea who has helped more than 1,000 people escape North Korea. And when I was doing all my initial research, some of the hidden camera footage that was being smuggled out of North Korea, it turned out, was being smuggled out with the help of Pastor Kim's network or underground railroad that goes through China into Southeast Asia and into Thailand and eventually into South Korea. And so when I discovered that and realized that was coming from Pastor Kim, I sought him out. And, over many months, he and I got to know each other. And he had been approached by several filmmakers in the past and also different sort of networks. At a certain point, he and I realized that we really had the same goal in mind, which was to do this, to plunge in and do this fully. And he was our ticket to all of that because, our film shoots on the border of North Korea and China, which is one of the most dangerous, arguably one of the most dangerous areas in the entire world. And there's no way that obviously we could have done that, or that any of us would go there and put any North Korean defector at risk. So it was really because of Pastor Kim's network, made up of both brokers who are doing this for money, who are helping people for money, and the other part of the network are people who are spiritually aligned with the whole mission of, helping people to escape and are more associated with the church side of things. And it was his network that was able to initially capture the footage along the border of North Korea and China. And then from there, it expanded out. And we were able to shoot ourselves in Southeast Asia, Laos, Thailand, or the border of Thailand and Laos, in Vietnam, and of course in South Korea. But all of our directives came from Pastor Kim, and without him, he was basically a line producer on this. He helped us to organize how we were going to do this unprecedented embedding with stories in a safe way, in a way that didn't draw attention to the people we were trying to follow.
I mean, I think that's like the most key important thing here. He's a hero in many different ways, and it's a very emotional viewing experience as well, because you tell the lives of these people who are risking everything to defect and get out of North Korea. Did every person that you chose to follow their own personal journeys in this film make it into the final film? Were there any stories that you had to leave out? I'm curious to know, because there's just so much risk involved, obviously, with this. I would just like to know, how you chose whose stories to specifically leave in the final edit of the film.
Yeah. So once Pastor Kim and I decided to work together, we both felt that we should follow two stories, because,
Okay.
obviously in film, you don't know, in a documentary, especially, you have no idea what you're going to end up using or what's going to resonate. And so we decided to follow two, and these two stories that we follow were the next two groups who contacted Pastor Kim after that. And so we did not follow any other stories. This was just happenstance. We had a mandate throughout that both for the Soyeon Lee story, this is a story of a mother trying to rescue her son out of North Korea, and for this Rowe family story, which are 5 people, including a grandma in her 80s and young children. The other story that we were following, we had a mandate that up until the last minute, really, up until literally like 2 weeks before Sundance, both groups had the right to tell us, we don't want to do this.
Wow.
And so it was really because we knew the only way we could do this was to take that risk, just as everybody in this film, and Pastor Kim talks about it beautifully. It was everybody in this film had to deal with the trust, the issues, us knowing we might never have a film in the end, the family blindly, they didn't know anything about the world outside of North Korea. They knew they were at risk in North Korea, so they just fled across the river into China. They didn't know what China was. They didn't know what to do next. They met a farmer, then they trusted that, and then the network, Soyeon Lee as well. So everybody, it was really a testament to trust, courage, and ultimately, I believe it was a miracle, because really, when I look back at how impossible it really was to do what we were doing, it's amazing. And again, Pastor Kim was obviously a key, we would never have been able to do it without him.
No, enough cannot be said about his efforts for this film. Absolutely, I agree with you on that. Was there ever a point in the making of this where you personally thought to yourself, this might be pushing it, I don't know if we can continue to keep moving forward. We might have to call it in because of either personal risk or just fear for your own life. I'm just curious to know, was there ever that moment?
Yeah, I mean, we definitely thought long and hard about all of that, from
Hmm.
the very beginning.
Yeah.
But and we vetted all of this through, the activism world, the policy world, both in South Korea and in the United States. Um, and we decided to go forward, but we were very cautious. We were definitely nervous. In some ways, the more we learned, the less nervous we became,
Okay.
because of the fact that, our focus is really on the people. And yes, the Kim regime is the backdrop to everything, because without them, people wouldn't even need to escape, right?
Right.
So the Kim regime and the way they've set up their country and the brutality of that is hugely important, but the focus is on the people. Also, the further we got into the film, like when we were shooting in Laos, okay, for instance, we saw North Korean soldiers training the Laotian military right outside of our van. I mean, there were, there were so many, we didn't know what was around the next corner, but it was like the deeper we all got into this together, the more there was no turning back. So there was no option, to turn back. It was so important and vital. We felt that what we were doing, and everyone felt that. In terms of the security of the subjects, well, Pastor Kim has been known by the regime since the early 2000s, and in fact had to stop going into China. He goes into
Right.
Southeast Asia, obviously, but the reason that only the network, the Underground Railroad, shot in China is because we weren't going to go into China and draw attention to the family. Pastor Kim doesn't go into China anymore because he was warned in 2009 that he could be kidnapped into North Korea from China, because China is complicit with the North Korean government.
Right.
So he's been known by the regime. So they've already known everything he's doing. Soyeon Lee has been known by the regime because she, years ago spoke out in multiple venues, including the UN, about violence against women inside North Korea. Hyun-seo Lee, a high-profile defector who wrote, the memoir "The Girl with Seven Names" and has a TED Talk with like 40 million views.
Yeah.
She's been known by the regime. So, so everybody was already known. I mean, other than us. But in terms of the brokers and all of that, we definitely, disguised voices. We blurred faces. Everything was vetted over and over and over again by multiple sources in terms of security.
So there sounds like there's a tremendous amount of preparation that goes into this before you even have a chance to turn on the camera. How long would you say the entire process from just thinking about conceptually what this was going to be to the time that you handed it in to Sundance? How long was that?
I mean, it was about really from just the beginning when I started to do research, which that in itself took months. God, let me do the math. It was like 4.5 years. Because the other thing is that when I first started shooting, I was shooting, mostly around Hyun-seo Lee, knowing that I wanted this present tense. I felt the film needed something experiential, something present tense. And her defection had happened more than 20 years previous. But I was shooting with her about her life inside South Korea, as really at the time the most high profile defector and someone who had been targeted by the regime. And that was a very interesting, sort of more of like a psychological thriller story. And that story is also very compelling. And I have all that footage. In the end, we couldn't
Right.
even, fit everything together. But when I met Pastor Kim, and when he and I got to know each other from that period of time, it was really, it was like almost 3 years total from when I
Wow.
first met Pastor Kim. So the film took a real turn about 1.5 years in when I met Pastor Kim.
So you said up until like 2 weeks before Sundance, you didn't necessarily even have a green light to go forward with the final film necessarily, but the editing process, I imagine you must have had hours upon hours upon hours of footage for this, in so many different formats too. Footage that also, like you said earlier, had to be smuggled in. I can't imagine the editing process on a project like this, and it's distilled down to 115 minutes. Can you tell us what your original rough cut assembly was, and what the editing process just was like during the making of this, because based on what I'm hearing, it sounds like the documentary took on many shapes and forms throughout the process of making it.
It did. And I also edited the film. So it did take on many shapes and forms. The Rowe family gave their approval on the film far before that 2-week before Sundance point. The person who really we wanted to make sure that she saw the film in its final form before she gave final approval, because she had seen pieces of the film and other versions of the film, but was really Soyeon Lee, because she's the one who was attempting to rescue her son out of North Korea, and her son was actually caught on the border of North Korea and China before Pastor Kim's group even was able to start helping him, because what happened was there was a North Korean broker who took him over the river from North Korea to China. And then the plan was that Pastor Kim's underground network was going to meet him at a certain time and place. And before that even happened, he was caught. It seems that one of the North Korean brokers may have made a deal with the Chinese government and actually turned him in. So he was actually caught. He was imprisoned in China, and he was actually repatriated during the pandemic, early in the pandemic, back to North Korea. So with Soyeon, and it's so hard to get information out of North Korea. So I was filming with her up until also right before Sundance, and, wanting to get the most up-to-date part of the story, and then wanting to make sure that she wanted to go forward with this. And if she hadn't, the second story in the film was going to be something else. It was going to be more of this kind of dark belly of the soul of Seoul, South Korea, which was the Hyonseo. So there was a whole nother, I was working with multiple structures. The other thing is that not only was I working with multiple structures in terms of whether this is Soyeon and the Rowe family or whether Hyonseo and the Rowe family, but also because Hyunseo's story is also so resonant and so deeply meaningful to me and to her, and I think to audiences. For a while we were considering this as a series. So I cut, 3 episodes of a series that involved all 3 stories. I cut, versions of what might have been a double feature. I mean, it was like insane. Because I knew that we didn't know if we were going to, use Soyeon, because we certainly weren't going to do anything that would, put at risk her son or anything. And because of, just like you said, the massive amount of footage, it was like, we have to have the version that has Soyeon, the version that doesn't have Soyeon, and also the version that potentially uses more of the footage and more of the story. And then ultimately, when Soyeon said yes, we, went with the version that was what you see, and where Hyonseo really becomes the voice of what's going on inside North Korea. That's how she is sort of contributes to the film, and her story inside South Korea is a whole nother thing, which I have so much footage, and who knows, maybe we will turn it into a film. I certainly have the material, but it was challenging. The editing was
gonna say, it certainly sounds like it. Now that the hopefully anxiety attack of the production of this movie is over for you, it wins the audience award over at Sundance, gets picked up for distribution. You guys have recently been nominated for 4 Critics' Choice Documentary Awards now at this point. Awards are nice and everything, but as someone who follows the award season race as closely as I do, I always see it as a way to just get a film a level of exposure. More people will hopefully see it when they see it gets nominated or wins these awards. So looking back on it all now and knowing, because I'm going to clue you in now, your film's on a very, very nice trajectory throughout the next couple of months. Knowing that more people are going to hopefully gravitate towards this film because of its awards season run, how are you feeling about the way the film's been received so far?
I mean, I think we're all just so amazed and blown away by the way that the film is being received, the emotional reaction, that the outrage also about what's going on inside North Korea. And, we've been traveling with Pastor Kim and Soyeon, have been in the United States for most of the last 2.5 months. The Rowe family were also in the United States at Sundance. And the response to them, after seeing this film and then meeting Pastor Kim, this like rock star, like guy who's like risking his life and doing so much for people. And then to meet Soyeon, who just, the heartbreak of her story and what's going on now for her, and how she's trying to advocate for her son and really doing a lot of that in the United States. So it's been amazing. I mean, the most important thing to us, like you said, is obviously the awards are great. Or if we get anything, I was amazed when we got nominated for the Critics' Choice. I didn't even know we were up for them, and then suddenly I got an email. I was like, oh wow. But yeah, I mean, the most important thing is that people see this and that we get this out there, because again, we in the United States don't ever have the opportunity in the news to hear about the people, to hear from the people. We're blocked from the people. That is the entire, that is exactly how North Korea has remained the country that it is by keeping the people inside hermetically sealed from the outside world. So the exchange of information, us learning about what's really going on inside North Korea, then makes us responsible for helping. If we don't know anything, we have a perfect excuse not to pay attention. But hopefully this film will bring this to a wide audience and will force, countries around the world, administrations around the world, to, when they speak about North Korea, not just speak about the nukes, and North Korea is not going to give up their nukes, by the way. So even talking about that is a waste of time. But, so when we talk about North Korea, we shouldn't just be talking about the nukes. We have to be talking about the people every single time North Korea is mentioned, because it is an outrage, and we're all standing by as witness to this, in some form. And so hopefully, this film will bring people into the fold to try to advocate for help. And then also a main goal with this film, and also with just activists in general who are dealing with North Korea, and even policy people dealing with North Korea, is getting information into North Korea, because again, the people are so cut off that they don't, unless you live right near the border with China, where you might get some information, most of North Korea doesn't know anything about the outside world, except what they're told. And so they don't even know how relatively miserable their existence is, because they believe, and they're told, that the rest of the world is actually worse off. So we have to get information about the outside world into North Korea, so that North Koreans can have a sense of entitlement and a sense of what they deserve, because that's also going to activate change. So I'm going to start getting emotional here, but this is really what it's about.
Yeah, absolutely. It's an emotional film. It's a gripping film. It's an informative movie. It literally was, for me, everything I could ever possibly want in a documentary feature, and that's why I love it so dearly. It's one of the best films I've seen so far this year, and I hope that more people, as a result of this conversation and anything else, seek it out for all the reasons that you said. Madeleine, thank you so much once again.
Thank you, Matt. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Really appreciate it. Absolutely.
Yeah, thank you.
Have a good rest of your day.
You too.